Good evening and welcome to DCPS Parent University. Tonight we are talking about supporting our students in accelerating learning inside and outside of the classroom. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Natalie Treadgold. I am part of the family engagement team here at DCPS, and I'm going to kick us off and share a couple of housekeeping items and then turn it over to our wonderful presenters. So the first thing I want to share is that there are subtitles available for this evening. If you need subtitle assistance, you can click the gear icon in the bottom right corner of your screen, select the language, and then it will start to show subtitles in that selected language. I also want to share that we have a live simultaneous interpretation in Spanish happening in a different room. So if you do need that interpretation, my colleague will be putting a link in the chat now to be able to access this session in Spanish. Finally, we are using Microsoft Teams Live for this event tonight. So we are excited to accept and respond to all of your questions, or as many as we possibly can. So you'll want to use that Q&A box to ask questions, and if others are asking questions that you also want to hear about, then you can give them a thumbs up sign. We are going to also have some live Q&A with our presenters. I do want to just flag that, the focus of tonight's session is that accelerating learning and focusing on student academics and social emotional learning. We know that families have a lot of questions about a lot of health and safety and facilities, so we'll do our best to respond to those questions in the chat. And I also would direct you to our Parent University recording from last week about general reopening and recovery content, and we can include a link to that in the chat as well. And then the last thing before I turn it over to our presenters, it's really important to us that Parent University is a safe and welcoming space for all of our families. And so we have a couple of community agreements that we ask folks to keep in mind as they're engaging in the session tonight. One is assuming everyone's best intentions. So, we want to make sure that both families and DCPS, that we are assuming the best of each other and coming at this work together from a asset-based stance. The second is going hard on ideas and soft on people. So we welcome and invite your honest questions, your feedback, just making sure that we are being respectful of one another. And finally, accepting some non-closure. So like I said, we're going to really focus tonight's session on accelerating learning. We know you might have other questions, and we definitely encourage you to watch that previous Parent University. We'll do our best to answer as much as we can. And then also we will be updating the Reopen Strong website with current information as soon as we have it. So we're really excited to welcome all of our students back into school buildings this year. DCPS is open 5 days a week, and we're really excited to share with you tonight a little bit more about what that will look like for our students. So we have some wonderful presenters for you tonight. Corey Colgan, who is the Chief of Teaching and Learning, and Jen Rosenbaum, who is the Deputy Chief of Acceleration. And I will let them tell you a little bit more about themselves and their work. But Jen, I'm going to turn it now to you.
Thank you so much, Natalie. I'm happy to be here with everyone tonight. Like Natalie said, my name is Jen Rosenbaum, and I am our Deputy Chief of Acceleration at DCPS. I've been at DCPS Central Office for a couple of years now, and started my career actually as a DCPS teacher a while ago. So I'm excited to be here with you and talk a little bit about our acceleration strategies for the year. And as we get going, I just want to make sure that we pause before we get into any of the nitty-gritties talking about acceleration and really emphasize what Natalie alluded to in her intro, which is when we talk about acceleration at DC Public Schools, we're really thinking about the whole child. So we're not just thinking about academic acceleration in isolation and making sure kids catch up and learn all of the content and that they're really ready to go and moving on literacy and math skills in isolation. We think about the whole child, excuse me, including SEL, social emotional learning needs, including relationships, including the context in which they're learning, students' identities, because we truly know and research supports the fact that if we address the needs of the whole child and our teachers and school teams think holistically about students, that the gains that we actually see in academics are greater. So not only are we providing that whole child support and that holistic approach to development, but it translates into better academic gains. And so we want to make sure that we're doing all of that work together. So as we start to talk about some of the details of acceleration and our approach, you'll see that come to life, but did just want to ground us in that so that we go into this conversation with a shared understanding of what is in the universe of acceleration that we're discussing tonight. So as we move into our approach to acceleration, we've articulated 5 guiding principles that are really driving the work. These actually kicked off as we led summer acceleration academies this year and will maintain as we move into our school year acceleration strategies. And so just to touch on each of these briefly, the first is a focus on holistic environments. So that's what I was mentioning earlier. We really want to make sure that we're being inclusive of all of the domains of children's development, their social development, their wellness, their relationships, joyful learning environments, while simultaneously being very intentional about providing access to grade level content and really being thoughtful. And Corey will talk a little bit more about this, about prioritizing the grade level content that's most important for students. So recognizing that within each grade, there are a subset of prioritized skills or standards that we want to make sure students focus on. And so making sure that we cover those. We also have accelerators for learning for all, right? So acceleration is not just for some kids or those kids or a group of kids. There are strategies that will be in place for all students and additional strategies for smaller groups or individual students who might need something extra. But this is happening. Our acceleration approach is for all kids. And schools are using data cycles to inform that work. So they have systems and structures in place at the school level to sit down and look holistically at how kids are doing, where their strengths are, what their needs may be, and think about how to respond. Knowing that development isn't static, right? What somebody needs in September is probably going to be different from what they need in December. And so schools have ongoing cycles to do those step backs and figure out what kids need, where their strengths are, and what the school can do in response. And finally, our last principle is extended learning time and tutoring. So knowing that many students have been out of buildings or haven't had full-time in-person learning for the past year and a half, we're thinking creatively about how we can build, more learning time and more intentional tutoring time in for students to act as additional accelerators to focus on some prioritized skills. So we'll talk a little bit more about each of these as we go on, but did just want to ground us in those 5 principles. And so as I mentioned, our acceleration work started this summer. You may have heard about acceleration academies happening at your schools. Some schools had different names for them. But functionally, they were an opportunity for kids to come together in person this summer in school buildings and engage in some content, some academic content, and some social, emotional, and enrichment and relationship building opportunities. Again, going back to that guiding principle of holistic environments. So here you can see a few pictures from some of our elementary schools. And in this quote from the teacher, you can see some of those guiding principles really coming to life, right? So you see the holistic environment in that Kids had an afternoon filled with yoga, Japanese cooking, drama, STEM projects, African dance, ballet, and they were able to focus on academics in the morning. So kids got both of those pieces as they were engaging in their summer Acceleration Academy. And the Acceleration Academy in and of itself was outside of the regular school calendar or school day, and so was providing additional learning time for kids. So these happened across our elementary schools, and as you'll see also at our secondary schools, with similar types of structures, right? So you can see in this quote from the school staff, students interacted with each other with so much love and appreciation, gave the participating teachers time to develop and helped us make more informed decisions for the fall. So teachers are able to use this time to really get to know kids and be able to figure out how to best support them moving into the fall. And again, you can see this balance of SEL or social emotional learning and curriculum work happening side by side, because we know that if those things happen in isolation, the impact just isn't the same. And when we can marry them and merge them together, we really provide a much more holistic experience for kids. So our next slide, great. I'm actually going to turn it over to Corey now to talk a little bit more about how our acceleration principles will take hold for the school year.
Great. Great, thank you very much, Jen. Great, thank you very much, Jen. My name is Corey Colgan. I'm the Chief of Teaching and Learning. I am also a DCPS parent of an elementary, middle, and high school student. So, and I've been with DCPS now for about 12 years. So I'm happy to speak with you this evening about a little bit more about our approach for acceleration and what you can expect when your students return to school. And thank you very much for being here. So we're going to go through each of these guiding principles in a little more detail, and a little bit later on in the session, there'll be the opportunity to answer some questions for you if you have them. So we can go ahead to the next slide. Beginning with holistic environments, Jen described this well, and she mentioned our focus on the whole child. So we know that students will learn better if they feel that they are in a safe, trusting environment, if they have positive relationships with their teachers and also with their peers and their classmates, and where there's a community of learners. So this is a big focus for our schools, particularly in the first 3 weeks of school. Each school team was asked to develop a first 3 weeks of school plan to think about all the different ways that they're going to be welcoming students back into the school and back into individual classrooms, and helping create those positive learning environments, and also helping students readjust to the school environment, and also schools are recognizing that students have experienced a range of different experiences during the pandemic, and it's something that we want to be attuned to. Additionally, I would say, and the reason you see a little music note there associated with the holistic environments, it's really important to us at DCPS that we are not one of those places that may say, okay, students missed some of their instructional time in the past year and a half. We're just going to double down on ELA and math because those are the tested content areas. No, we believe very strongly in DCPS that the entire curriculum is very important. We know that when students learn about the world around them, when they learn science and social studies content, it not only helps them be more knowledgeable and curious about the world around them, but it actually also impacts positively their literacy on math skills as well. So we will have a broad curriculum across the board. We will continue to invest in the arts and music because we also know those courses help students feel engaged and excited about school and just contribute to their positive experience they have. So that is what we mean by holistic environments. We have been very focused on this with school leadership, as well as this will be a big focus for our teachers as they come back for pre-service training beginning this Friday. The second guiding principle is access to grade level content. And so, as I already mentioned, that we want to make sure students have access to that content across content areas. But the key message here that we are leaning on or leaning into is that what we mean by acceleration when it comes to academic content in the classroom is that not that we are going to rush through content. We're not just going to teach faster and hope that kids can keep up. This is actually a term that is distinguished from the idea of remediation. So in a remediation approach, a teacher might teach, for instance, all of the content from the previous school year that the students maybe didn't get to. And so in that case, they spend a lot of time on below grade level content. Whereas in the acceleration approach, you do recognize that students may have missed some content from the year before, but they focus on the critical grade level content, as Jen said. So our curricular teams have prioritized the standards for each grade level. And then we look at what are the prerequisite skills from the year before that students may have missed, but that they need in order to understand or be able to do this grade level content. And then we weave that in. So you provide these lessons on prerequisite skills as they're needed to help students access the critical grade level content. And that can look a lot of different ways in the classroom. It could be a little mini lesson at the beginning of the class. It could just be completely combined within the lesson, or because, as Jen mentioned, and we'll get to in a moment, that our guiding principle around the data cycle, we will have a lot of data on students on what they know and what they don't related to a particular content area. And so teachers will use the strategy of small groups often to provide that prerequisite skill building for certain students. So an example here that we have on the slide is that it's a second grade standard in our math standards that the students learn the words half or halves and thirds and fourths. So in second grade, they're expected to learn those words and be able to sort of draw pictures of a cake or a circle cut into halves or thirds or fourths, and then they can show that in a rectangular shape as well. They haven't really introduced, the standards don't introduce the idea formally of fractions and what does the top number, the numerator of the fraction, or the bottom number, the denominator, mean in that fraction. That doesn't come until third grade. So in this acceleration approach, if the teacher in third grade is introducing the fraction lesson, but they have learned that the students don't have, or they're not positive the students have like sort of mastered that visual representation or the vocabulary from the second grade, they can just weave that into that content, because obviously fractions are really important content in third grade. And so we're going to want to make sure that students come with that sort of conceptual understanding, or come to that conceptual understanding of them. So they'll lean a little bit on the second grade standards for the students who need that in order to understand the concept of fractions. Okay, so that's our approach to teaching like the grade level content, the knowledge and skills for each grade level. We also think about how we teach in the classroom and what best practices can we really lean into that will help make sure our students, all of our students, learn more and learn best. And so some examples of these that we've been working on with our school teams is increasing the use of small group targeted instruction. So we know that, especially because of the experience of the past year and a half, some of our students will come in with differing sets of knowledge and skills. And so the best way for teachers to address that is to be able to work with small groups of students and give them a little bit of extra support with the content that they need. Or if they're a student who, is understanding all of that, they may need an additional challenge within the class. And so teachers can use small group for that. Leveraging technology is another way we can accelerate learning for all students. So our teachers and students have learned a lot about technology over this past year. And we also know that technology offers a lot of great opportunities for us to provide some built-in supports for students, which can, again, then accelerate learning. So for example, we can use technology to provide different representations of the content that we're teaching. We can show students a visual or a picture or an image of what something looks like while they're reading a text, for instance. We can, and that's particularly helpful, for instance, for English language learners, but also can be for struggling readers. We can use the technology to translate. We can use the technology to read aloud to students, which can help them with content acquisition and also with improving their vocabulary and fluency. So there's lots of ways that all of the great work that we've invested in technology this past year can actually help to accelerate learning for our students next year. And then a third key area we're leaning into is the focusing on literacy across the content area. So I already mentioned that we know that students building knowledge of the world across all content areas will not only help them be more curious and knowledgeable citizens, but will also can also help them improve their literacy. So when we read and write in all of our classes, it has kind of like a multiplying effect and makes students stronger readers, writers, and students. And then for our students who are learning to read, so our youngest learners, we have been working very hard over the past year and a half to revamp all of our professional development and just add to our resources to ensure that all of our reading curriculum and approaches are tightly aligned to the science of reading. So this is basically what the science tells us about how students learn to read best. If we follow that science closely, then we know we will be more successful with having more of our students learn to read or catch up if they were not meeting reading benchmarks or are not currently meeting reading benchmarks. Okay, and data cycles. And I also see a really helpful question about this in the chat, which I can try to address. But basically, we are just trying to do a better job this year as we go into this new school year in collecting holistic data on our students. And that doesn't mean that we're adding testing days. We are not adding any new major assessments for our students. It just means that, one, we have a very helpful dashboard now that allows schools, and we use this to launch our summer acceleration academies, but this dashboard allows our school teams to see all kinds of data for students, like how they're doing in their coursework, what is their attendance, are there any behavioral incidents with the student, and how are their interim assessments looking, like how all of those pieces of data in one place. And that just allows our schools to take that whole child look. So that's one piece. The other thing is that we're working with our teachers to just increase their skill at looking on a day-to-day basis on how students are receiving the instruction and how are they understanding. So we can even leverage our technology again for checks for understanding with the students, and then have a quick record of that teachers can analyze. And so they can say from one day to the next or 1 week to the next, these are some students who I know are going to need a little additional support on this concept, and so I'm going to pull them into a small group. So it's really about looking at our students' work on a weekly basis in collaborative team meetings, as well as teachers attending on a daily basis to how students are receiving the instruction. Okay, and then even with all of that, we do know that some of our students are going to really need some extended learning time and some tutoring. Tutoring is an approach that we are very happy to be able to provide to a subset of our students this year. So high impact tutoring is an acceleration approach that research has shown to be really effective in accelerating students who are behind in meeting kind of grade level benchmarks. And so particularly in the areas of literacy and math, we have asked all schools to provide tutoring for a subset of their students. The tutoring could be provided either during the day or in outside of school time. So it could be after school, or some schools are even leveraging Saturdays to provide additional tutoring or small group support time. Schools will be leaning on school staff as much as possible to provide that. So teachers who are willing and able to tutor, say, in after-school hours, will be paid a stipend or paid admin premium to be able to support students in that way. And that's one of our highest priorities because, of course, our educators, our own teachers know our students the best. They know the curriculum. And so that's a really, really great opportunity. In addition to the school-based staff, we have some partners who have track records of success, partners for whom we've vetted their resources and the way that they approach tutoring. And so in some cases, we do have some literacy and math tutors who also will be providing supports to students. And then Jen showed you a few pictures and some quotes from our wonderful Summer Acceleration Academies that happened this summer. Teachers, students, school teams, and hopefully parents all really got a lot out of that experience. And so we're excited to be able to offer school year acceleration academies. So the idea here is schools will use out of school time. So again, mostly this would be after school. Some schools are going to leverage Saturdays, possibly before school time. And they will use this time to provide not only the tutoring I mentioned, but for students whose needs might not be quite as intense, they might offer this support in small groups. And again, this is academic, but it also can be social emotional supports that are being provided. It could be it's often enrichment that gets kids excited about learning in school. And so it's a mix of really targeted academics and enrichment and social emotional supports that would be provided in the school year acceleration academies. Okay, and I wanted to just take a moment here and say a few things about our students with IEPs. So we know, just like our entire student population overall, the past year and a half, may have presented challenges for students who were learning most of the time, or most of the students were learning most of the time virtually. So first and foremost, the important thing to know is that when we welcome back all of our students with IEPs, they will be a part of all of the acceleration strategies and guiding principles that I just named. So schools will, of course, implement the students' IEPs and any services that are on the IEP, but those students will also be participating in any other, they have the opportunity to participate in the other supports or acceleration activities that the school has set up. We are asking all of our schools to review the individual student with IEP's progress and their needs between 4 and 8 weeks into the school year. So we just want to see, are all of the supports that we're providing, are students responding to them? Are we seeing growth? Are we seeing students on track toward meeting their IEP goals? And then based on that review, parents will receive communication from the school team by October 30th that will just, sort of summarize what it is that they're seeing in terms of the students' responsiveness to the supports that are being provided, and if anything additional, may be warranted, then that's something that the team would discuss together. So we're going to have the opportunity to pause here and see if folks have any questions, and we will do our best to answer them.
Great, thanks so much, Corey and Jen. So we have a couple questions here I'm going to raise up. I do hear an echo on my end. Do you guys have an echo? Okay, I think that's better. Great. I know you spoke to this a little bit, but Jen, would love to hear from you how schools are going to approach social emotional learning this year and how that fits in with the rest of our acceleration approach.
Sure, thanks for that question, Natalie. Can you all hear me?
Yeah, you sound great.
So in terms of SEL, social emotional, as we think about our approach to acceleration, like I mentioned, we really do want to take into account the needs of the whole child, and the social emotional learning is at the core of that. right? We know that as people, adults or children, we learn best and can engage most when we are comfortable in our environment in terms of the relationships that we have with people. So I think Corey mentioned that schools of all, I mean, every year, the first few weeks of school are very much devoted to relationship building. This year, even more so, knowing that many kids are coming back in person into the building for the first time in a long time. And so schools are being very, very thoughtful and intentional about how to build in opportunities for kids to build relationships with one another, with their staff, so that foundation is in place and kids feel comfortable and safe engaging in their learning. And so those are some of the foundational strategies that we use, or we sometimes call them tier 1, or they're for all the kids in the school. And then on top of that, just as we're planning for additional academic supports, so Corey mentioned our school year acceleration academies or tutoring, we're also planning for similar additional supports around social emotional learning. So there can be students who are doing great in their academics, but who are struggling socially or emotionally. Those kids will need access to those additional supports for social emotional learning, and so schools are planning to provide that as well. And that's part of where this holistic looking at data, let's look at a child's academics, their attendance, their social emotional data, all of these pieces together so we can understand the full picture and really understand what's going on so that we can address the root cause and have the highest or the best impact on the child's development.
Great, thank you so much for that, Jen. We're gonna switch back to Corey now. This question is for you, Corey. One parent wanted to know how teachers will address the wide difference in academic skill within the same classroom. So how are we preparing teachers to teach to students who are coming in ahead, students who are coming behind, students who are on grade level, to be able to support all students where they are?
Great. Thank you for the question, Natalie. And this is a great question. And to be honest, this is something that our teachers actually work on every single year, but we anticipate that the, I guess, diversity of skill or knowledge of their students might be wider than usual this year. So the main way that we are recommending teachers address this is there's really two ways. One is they can leverage the technology that they have in the classroom because we are, as we're going back to school in grades 3 through 12, our students, our classrooms will have a 1-to-1 device ratio. So all students in grades 3 through 12 will have access to a device at school. Teachers can build in some additional supports leveraging the technology that will help. Teachers are going to continue to keep their courses set up through Canvas, our learning management system. So students can see assignments there, et cetera, turn in their assignments there. And so there are a couple of tools there that can support students. But I would say that our main strategy is the use of small group instruction. So we rewrote our instructional guidance for each content area to, so in the guidance I'm talking about is we provide teachers with guidance about how to use their class time. And so for each content area and grade band, we provided recommendations of how the class could be structured to incorporate daily small groups. So as I mentioned before, we're going to have a routine of looking at student work collaboratively and planning together on a weekly basis, and then teachers will be using that information to plan small groups for the upcoming week. So they can say, okay, this group of students really needs this bit of background knowledge before we go into the lesson, so I'm going to have them in a small group on this day. And then the next day, I might have this group of students who are actually on grade level or advanced on this particular topic. And so I might give them an extension activity. So it's a lot for our teachers to juggle, but they are wonderful, and we are giving them guidance on that. And I think that is probably our best tool to support the students at varying levels.
Great, thank you, Corey. And I'm going to keep you on. We have another question for you. Could you talk about what online platforms will be used for assignments and homework for students this coming year?
Yes, great. So as I mentioned, we are going to continue to use Canvas. So if you're a returning DCPS parent, you are probably at least a little bit familiar with Canvas. It's our learning management system. And what that means is students can log on and they can see, if they're an elementary student, they see their class or their homeroom. And if they're a secondary student, they see all of the classes that they're scheduled into. And in Canvas online environment, they can see their assignments. The teachers can post supporting content like videos or texts that the students need to read, links to research that they may need to do. And so it's also a system for submitting work, and where teachers and students can communicate and teachers can provide feedback on student work. So even as we're returning to in-person learning, which we're very thrilled about, knowing that in-person learning is so great for our students, we are also very pleased to be able to continue to leverage Canvas. And additionally, we will continue to have teams available. So it is set up so that if the teacher may leverage Teams in a classroom setting to do like a back channel chat, but also another reason to have Canvas and Teams set up and ready to go and kind of keep touching base on those throughout the years, just in case we want to be flexible and nimble should conditions change. If anything would happen, we want to make sure that we have everything ready to go in place for our students. So Canvas and Teams are two major platforms. We also are continuing to use many of the tools that we used before. We are adding Nearpod officially to our suite, which many of our teachers used. And then all of the blended learning programs that many students use that they find through Clever, such as iReady, or some of the reading programs like Reading Plus or Lexia, those will still be available as well. And we've encouraged our teachers to do a really, balanced mix of, no technology in the classroom and then sometime leveraging that technology in smart ways in the classroom. So it will be a mix.
Thanks, Corey. The next question, Jen, I'm going to turn to you, and then I think it'll take us really nicely into the next part of the presentation. So we got a question from a parent who wanted to know what families can do just to help to support their child, whether they are worried that they're behind or on grade level, or even if they're advanced, how families can work and partner with schools to support their child.
That is a great question, Natalie, and leads right into our next section. So yeah, let's go to the next slide. So as we think about what families can do to support, a couple of things that we want to lift up. So one, we are focused on the whole child and making sure that we're not just honing in on the academic piece. And a big part of what you can do at home is the same thing, right? So thinking first and foremost about how to engage with your child, about their experience at school, and not just, I'm the mom of a rising kindergartner, and if I say, what did you do at school today? I get nothing. But if I can ask a slightly more targeted question, and this applies pre-K through 12, right? Oftentimes kids and adults will be more inclined to answer or provide more information. So questions like, what was the most interesting part of your day? What was challenging today? What was excited today? What are you reading about? What's it making you think about? Some of those questions that get at the social emotional or the relationships or the engagement with the learning, beyond just some of the rote, like, what did you do today, can help lift up some of those experiences that children are having and equip you with more information about what's going on at school, so that when you want to go and talk with the teacher or someone at your school, you have a little bit more insight into your child's experience holistically and can bring that to the table with them. And so as we think about providing specific supports for your individual child, I think we've talked a couple times about how schools are going to have sort of an array of options ready and available to think about, okay, we have students who need a little bit of extra support in forming relationships with peers, or in some of these foundational literacy skills, or whatever the area may be. And it will be helpful as families if you're able to engage with the school in some of those conversations, so they can make sure they are understanding your perspective as well, because you obviously know your child best, you've known your child longest, and making sure that you're at the table in those conversations is really important. So the next slide talks a little bit about some strategies that you can use if you want to go proactively to your school to engage in a conversation about any of these areas where you think your child has strengths or might be struggling. So one, just reaching out, asking to meet with or talk to the teacher, either virtually or in person, and just giving them a heads up about what you'd like to talk about so that they can come prepared. If you're asking about something related to literacy versus social emotional learning, it might just help them be able to bring the right materials or prepare the right information. When you do get with them, making sure to just remind them of what you're here to talk about and share the why, right? What have you noticed at home that's making you want to have this conversation with your teacher? And then asking them functionally the same thing. So what are you noticing about this in school? I notice at home when my child sits down to read at night, he gets really frustrated the minute he can't decode or figure out what one of the words says. Does he do that at school? Like, I want to understand, where is this coming from? And then don't be afraid to follow up, right? Don't be afraid to ask for clarification or for information. Sometimes as educators, it's really easy for us to just slip into education jargon. Don't hesitate to ask the teacher to define anything that's unfamiliar to you, or to push on some of their observations and say, I don't understand what that means or how that relates to this issue. Use them as your resource, get the support from them, and ask them for resources. So maybe there's a specific strategy that the teacher uses in class that you can do easily at home. When your child gets stuck on a word at school, we do this specific support. You can try saying this at home and see if that helps. And then as you wrap up the conversation, thanking them and figuring out when or how you want to touch base again, right? So maybe it's, I'll try that next week and would love to just send you a note or an email to let you know how it's going. Or let's look at how grades go for the next quarter and then follow back up, whatever that next touch point is, so that you guys know when you're going to reconnect. So there will be plenty of opportunities where schools will reach out and they'll ask for your input. But I think part of this work together as we collaborate is also you being able to go to the school and being able to get this information when you feel like it's relevant for you and your child. So encourage you to do that as well. And with that, I think I'm going to turn it back to Natalie.
Thanks, Jen. So I'm going to take us towards the end. We do have some extra time tonight, so if there are more questions that that folks have and want to add to the chat, we're happy to do some additional Q&A with our presenters. It looks like most of what is in there has been addressed or we spoke to live, but like I said, we have some time, so happy to take more questions. While we are doing that, I'm going to just share that we do have one more session in our Recover Strong Focused Parent University series, which is on Thursday, focused on mental health support. So we got some questions tonight about SEL, and we talked a lot about the whole child, and obviously, you know, mental health is a big part of that, in addition to academics and social. So, so please register and join us. We'll add the link for that to register and RSVP for that session into the chat as well. And like I mentioned, both this session and the workshop that we had last week are available on our YouTube channel. So there's the link there. We'll drop that into the chat as well. It's bit.ly/DCPS Parent U recordings. And we should have this session up in a day or two. And with that, like I said, please visit the Reopen Strong site for updates on DCPS policy, health and safety guidance, information about how we'll be keeping students safe this school year. We also have a survey that we'd love for you to give us some feedback about how you'd like to be engaged in the future, what's worked for you in engaging with DCPS in the past, and we'll have a link to that as well. And then if you have additional questions that didn't get addressed tonight, or if you'd just like to reach out to us, we do have an email address there, parentu@k12.dc.gov. And I am not seeing any additional questions come through. So I think with that, we're happy to let everyone have a few minutes back in your evening. And thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for the great questions. Thank you for engaging, and we hope to see you on Thursday.